How did coming out help me embrace my autistic identity as well as find my pathway to unmasking? Hi, I'm Brett the Audi Boss, and on this channel we talk about ADHD and autism in the workplace. I'm Brett, and I'm an autistic manager with ADHD, and I have over 10 years of leadership experience. Now, I'm going to explain how this topic actually connects back to work. More on that in just a minute. I've received a lot of requests from folks on my neuroqueer video to continue to talk about my queer identity and that intersection between being autistic, ADHD, and my queer identity. I'm going to do a little bit of that today, and there's going to be some work connections inside of all of that. So for me, one of the big things was I came out queer before I understood that I was autistic and had ADHD. But that process of coming out, discovering my queer identity, all of that was the beginning of my unmasking. It was the beginning of me understanding what we call my true self and not the role self, as Dr. Lindsay Gibson would refer to it as, where I was letting the mask slip a little bit. I was in my early 30s. I knew more and more that my queer identity was becoming ever more present. It was screaming to come out. It was screaming to be seen, to be heard, to live for far too many long years, masking that identity, keeping that identity down. Now, I was raised in a high control religion environment where I really didn't have the language or the words or the tools or the understanding to understand either queer identity or autism and ADHD. And that same high control religion also embedded in me at a very early age, very rigid, very specific rules to live my life by. And what I know now on this side of my autism diagnosis is those rules that I was taught from birth to those very early age, the first 10, 15 years of my life, those very rigid rules were the rules that I was expected to live my life by. And so I had always lived my life trying to expect those rules to be the rules that I lived by and that I held everybody else up to those rules too. Those rules were sometimes biblical, religious rules, but they were also rules established by that particular church and the leaders of that particular church, which were very much unique to that religion. It was a high control religious environment that, because of the tight control it held on its congregation, shockingly, it didn't stick around for very long. It fell apart, and then everybody had to disperse and go their own way. And at that time, I had to go from being in a small, tight control community, where even then, even within that community, I knew I was different, and I knew I had to hide a lot of parts of myself. I knew I had to hide what queerness was coming through at that time and the things that did make me different, the things that brought me joy. I knew I had to hide that inside that church. I knew I had to hide my special interests and the things that made me laugh, the things that made me smile, the things that made me happy. That high control church environment taught me very early on how to hide parts of myself. And little did I know that those were the beginnings of my masking tools, that masking identity that was happening, that was being done sort of unconsciously. When that fell apart, I then went into public school, and now I was faced with an entirely different universe, an entirely different world that was very scary and one that I was not at all prepared for. Rules that I was raised by at that point in my life taught me to be scared, to be fearful of that entire world that I was now walking into. I was scared, and I had to mask even more, and it was harder to find people that I could then unmask with. But over time, that happened. And then through school, high school, and then eventually college, I was able to sort of become a different version of myself. I often refer to masking, unmasking, the role self, the true self, kind of call it regeneration, because I'm constantly regenerating myself for the audience or the crowd or the amount of people that I'm with. And that's how I mask. I can mask in a different way so I can regenerate who I need to be in the crowd that I'm in with the people that I'm around. So if you're a huge Doctor Who fan like me, which is of course one of my biggest special interests, then you'll understand what I mean when I say I regenerate every time I'm around a different group of people. So through college, I finally was discovering queer friends. I developed really close friendships with people who were very different from me, and that challenged those rigid rules. And my sense of friendship with them sort of melted away some of those rules, and I was able to start to feel differently and understand those different parts of myself. I still didn't fully have that language yet, but I was starting to find different ways that I could unmask that part of myself, that part of my identity when I was around more of my very close friends at that time. First part of my career, I was a journalist, and I had a very public-facing role when I was a journalist, and so I felt I needed to mask a little bit more in that space. And so again, I kind of found different ways to sort of hide or suppress different parts of myself or different parts of my emotion because of the work that I was doing in a public journalism kind of role. So I felt that I needed to be a particular way when I was in those environments. But then I left my journalism role, and then I went to go work for an entirely different company. And this company was a private company that had a lot of people who were with their queer identity and just being very open and public about their identity at work. I started to really understand and gain the language that I had not had for all those previous 30 years so that I could find my way into understanding who I truly was. And so the more time that I would spend sort of questioning my identity, questioning myself, and questioning my likes, my dislikes, the things that I truly do want, challenging the rules that I was always raised by, challenging the rules I had created for myself, the more I would start to unmask just for myself, the way I was able to get closer to my true identity, to the true self, the true person that I was. And again, I didn't know I was unmasking at that time. This was all before my diagnosis. But that process of challenging myself when I was alone, when I would unmask for myself, I would take these very long walks where I would talk to myself, I would challenge myself, I would debate myself, and I would find my way to accepting truths about myself and accepting truths as I would challenge myself. And I would soon start to accept these things. So at first I would accept my queer identity for myself, and then I sat with that for a really long time. And then it became too much to sit with alone on my own, talking to myself and, being out to myself alone wasn't enough. Soon I had to really let that out because again, now that I had unmasked for myself, now I needed to be unmasked in more spaces so that I could feel comfortable with myself in the spaces that I showed up in. So I would start to unmask a little bit more for people in my life. And I really had this moment of coming out and being that true self, that true person for the people around me. And I was so scared and I had so much fear and so much panic. And here I was a person in my 30s, well established, I had a good career, I had made good money, I was taking care of myself. I had no reason to be scared, but I was nervous that so many different people would shut me out of their lives, that I would lose relationships because I was finally becoming my true self. I was letting myself come out. I was doing all this stuff. And I didn't feel safe coming out with everybody. I was very much specific about who I would come out or, in this case, unmask for. And even then, there were still elements of masking where I would bargain, where I would say certain things, or I would do just this, or how could I make this comfortable for them as I was coming out, as I was exploring this truer identity for myself. That trust was there, and so I was able to comfortably come out and exist and do all the things that I needed to do where I felt safe and I felt like I could be the real me. But even then, that process still took a few years for me to feel fully comfortable with. And as that grew, the more that unmasking process flowed through more of me, the more I started to go, well, okay, that went fairly well. I came out. Where else can I explore that process more about myself? How can I get more in touch with myself and my identity? And that process brought me to understanding first ADHD and then autism. And then the more I started to pull on those threads of okay, I'm challenging myself. Those things I relate to, that thing feels good. It went from a defensive feeling of feeling defensive the way I was raised with that high control religion and those rigid rules. When something would challenge me, the way I would mask, I would feel this defensiveness inside of me. That defensiveness is where I would mask or push things harder and deeper into the closet or suppress those things more and put on a performance of no, this is how it has to be. This is how it has to be. As I got older and was more comfortable with my queer identity and challenging things for ADHD and autism, it was more of but why though? Why does it have to be that way? And I'd have to ask myself these questions. Why? Why did it have to be this way? Why did we feel this way? Why are we so focused on this? And with some really good therapy, I was able to understand, well, those aren't my rules. Those were rules given to me as a child in a religious environment that I haven't been in over 25, 30 years. Those aren't my rules. Those are somebody else's rules. I was living those rules by somebody else's standards. Well, I'm an independent person. Those are not my rules. Those are not my standards. What are my rules? What are my standards? What do I care about? What are the things that I care about? And again, that's a part of the unmasking. What do I care about? Not what somebody else cares about, what somebody else told me to care about, but what do I specifically care about? And the more I started to go through that process, the more I learned about ADHD, and I started taking a lot of ADHD online quizzes. And then after a year of studying ADHD, then I have learned more about autism. And then I learned about masking and unmasking. And the more I learned about masking and unmasking and suppressing yourself, suppressing your needs, fawning, hiding those parts away of yourself, I then immediately went right back to my queer identity. When I did that for so long, I looked at people pleasing in all these different ways, all these different things where we talk about how all these different ways that we mask. And there's just so many ways that we mask. There's endless ways that we mask. But the more I started to question all of those different things and understand what masking was, even before I started to get my autism diagnosis, even before I started to self-diagnose, what if I tried to unmask? What if I tried to unmask while I'm trying to self-diagnose, while I'm trying to get a formal diagnosis? What if I challenged my masking self and see where that took me? And so the more I would start to unmask, that was my tipping point. That was the moment where it was like, okay, I want to live more authentically with my queer identity. And now I want to unmask more other parts of myself, be less fearful of my special interests, talking about my special interests, being those things. Now I'm going to decide more intentionally who I'm going to hide myself from and who I'm not. And the reason why I still do that today is a little bit of it is self-protection, yes, but a little bit of it is about protecting my energy. Masking and unmasking take up so much energy, and there's so much conflict inside and how that's created over the years. And there, creates a lot of burnout as well. But there's just certain people that come in and out of my life that I'm just like, I don't want to give them this energy. It actually can cause me less energy to just keep things to myself or keep things a little bit more masked because I know this person might be gone quickly or may not be around long. So just do the bare essentials, do the bare necessities. And then once they're gone, once that's out, then I can relax and be me again. And then I've got it all over again. So I'm always choosing, I'm always analyzing, I'm always sort of scanning and understanding who is a safe person, how much do I want to unmask with, how much do I want to come out with in terms of both coming out for my autistic identity, but coming out with my queer identity. My workplace was really where I felt more safe to step into my queer identity. My workplace at that time gave me a lot of sense of security where I could be more out, I could be more open with who I was and explore that with really thoughtful, kind, generous people who could help me have those conversations in ways that I needed to have those conversations. As I grew in my career, I had a very privileged position in that organization where I was on the senior leadership team. And it quickly became clear to me that if I, in my position, spoke about being queer, it would make it more of a safe space for other people. And then later on, the more I talked about being autistic with ADHD, I then realized, okay, it's going to be safe for other people to understand that this is, one, I'm a safe person to come talk to about autism and ADHD, but also it's going to create more safe spaces for other people to have their autistic and ADHD selves be a little bit more unmasked in the workplace. Now, I'd always tell everybody, you have to choose where to be safe. You have to make those choices for yourself because it's not always safe. Not every person is safe, and possibly challenge stereotypes, possibly challenge ideas, and possibly bring education and bring different things forward and bring other names and other resources and other ideas and other things that I learned, bring those things with me as I helped educate others. And I created resources, have found and shared other resources for people. Having that unmasking process and being more authentic, I have found helps other people find their way as well. Can't do it all the time. Don't do it in every situation. But the more I can find the situations where I can unmask at work and be more of my authentic self at work, the better off I think it helped everyone and everyone around me. It still happens as I still mask. I still have these conflicts. It still bounces around quite a bit. But I found that to be really helpful for myself, being happier with myself, especially as I get older and I'm able to sort of be more secure. I'm able to sort of unmask more and more and more and more. In this process of doing this and sort of reflecting, both coming out late, realizing I'm autistic late, yes, there's grieving. I've got a video about grieving, but I then still have to give myself a lot of self-compassion and I have to forgive my past masked self. That's a big one. I've got to be able to forgive that person for all the decisions that that person made at that time when I was still feeling more connected to that high control religion, those rigid rules, and convinced I was straight at that time. I may have said or done things that I am not proud of now. I may have acted in a way that I'm not proud of now, but I have to forgive that person, and I have to have self-compassion for that version of myself, for the person who is deeply hidden, deeply closeted, deeply masked, for a person who was just scared and didn't know how to exist in the world, and have a lot of compassion for that person. I am getting better about that now, but every once in a while, if a friend comes up from the past or something, from like 10, 15, 20 years ago, a person who I haven't connected with since both coming out and having my autism identified, I get a little bit more like, oh, what's this person going to say? There's a lot of cringe there, but I have to sort of find my way through that. And usually most people understand. And if I have to apologize for something that I did or, own something that I did a million years ago, that's part of it. I've got to own that. Especially if I caused anybody harm at those times. I have to own that, and I have to live with that and sit with that and apologize to that person. And I've done that. Sometimes with unmasking, we just get to a point where it's just like, I can't take it anymore. I have to unmask. I have to be that true self. I have to be the person I need to be. And I see those instances all the time where you just sort of kind of enough, and you just want to burst. It's a tipping point. For me, I just have to embrace those moments when they happen. And when I'm in a situation that I don't feel is fully safe, I get myself as quickly as I can to a safe place to recover or to react or to process or be unmasked with somebody who I can be unmasked with, or take enough alone time where I can recover from that sort of stuff. Dr. Megan Antonoff always talks about in their book, having a plan when you have to mask, and then having an unmasking plan afterwards. I think that's critically important for every day of my life, certainly. I hope this has been helpful in some level. I will have some more work-based videos again coming up soon. I've got a lot of videos planned for the next round of videos, so do stay tuned for that. Please like and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. If there's a topic like this one that you're interested in, that you'd like to know more about, or you'd like to hear me talk more about, please let me know in the comments. I'm definitely responsive in the comments, and I'm definitely responsive to requests for topics of video. I hope this was helpful. And be sure to check out the masking playlist, the autism masking playlist, where we have a ton of videos there as well. Thanks for watching.